Good afternoon to everyone. You're in medjlis of Cultural Creative Agency at Cosmoscow Art Fair. My name is Anastasiya Shavlохова. I'm head of Cultural Creative Agency. I will talk to Fahad bin Mухаммед Аль-Аттыйи, ambassador of the state of Qatar to Russia. We will talk about turbulence, social and personal one. So I will start from afar. How it happened that you come to Russia? What were your first impressions, and were they different from what you feel now about Russia?
Thank you for having me. Well, I never had any thoughts before coming to Russia 3.5 years ago that I would ever be in Russia. The closest I came to Russia was in 2010. I visited Belarus, and that was as far east I traveled to. But one day I was called in and I was told we would like you to be the ambassador to Russia. And my response was, why Russia?
And it was in 2000?
This was in 2016. As I have never had any interaction with Russia or Russians or had any view of this part of the world, no perceptions. For some reason, it was just out of my interest horizon. And of course, there was a little bit of anxiety as going to a new place, a new culture, a new language, something that I was not familiar with. But I said, let's embrace it, let's get to learn, let's go and engage and see how it turned out. And it turned out to be the most amazing experience I've had in my career.
But once you mentioned that there are plenty of commonalities between Russia and Qatar, what are these commonalities?
Family values, and the funny, interesting thing is when I came, I saw a lot of things that reminded me of home. The family unit is still intact in Russia, similarly to in Qatar. And of course we all know how the family unit has been challenged worldwide within a context of modernism, but that was a big kind of moment of relief for me to see it still alive in a country that is heavily involved in these, let's say, transcendental shifts in public attitude worldwide. The other thing is the belief, the spiritual, which goes back to hundreds of years. Yes, there has been a suspension of 80 years of communism, but nonetheless deep seated in the Russian psyche, this spirituality and myth was dormant, and it only sort of was revitalized after the dismantling of the Soviet Union.
It depends. Some people say that Soviet Union was also kind
exactly.
religious organization.
I heard that as well. And of course, you thrive under calamities. It seems that also there is a sense of romanticism about struggle, which
there is.
Which I found to be very fascinating. And I think because my ancestors have struggled for hundreds of years, because they lived in a very harsh environment, there was no water, and they lived a very nomadic life. And until only recently that Qatar was endowed and blessed with hydrocarbon resources which transformed the entire country. But still the character that is influenced by these difficult environmental natural calamities still exists. The strength of that character still can be seen within the Qatari character. And these are the sort of the intersections that I found between Russian culture and Qatari culture, and represented in the persona of people.
How comes you decided to establish Cultural Creative Agency? What is the mission of it, and why you decide? What's like modus operandi of this project? It's happened after 3 years staying here.
Of course, and that perhaps was the natural progression time for somebody to really start to understand how can somebody give and provide and be and set up something of value. It wasn't. I didn't want to be hasteful in rushing things, but I wanted to really create something that I know that it will be of value to both Russia and Qatar. We have witnessed over the years that due to technological innovations and mass communication that we have lost that richness and depth in our work, and we've become slightly more superficial.
Because of the speed, probably.
Of course, speed is the biggest thing, and this speed has its own consequences on our lives, on the quality of the things that we do. So I think the idea here is that the CCA is going to focus on things that matter and that are relevant, and that would necessitate time for things to be done properly. So that's the whole point. And to connect two cultures that would otherwise not know each other, we need to engage actively, and we need to more so not engage just at a political level, but also at a cultural level. And in order to do that effectively, and in order to do that with the paying attention to the different nuances, there ought to be some structure to mitigate the differences and try to establish the platforms for discussion.
We discussed yesterday this term of new cultural diplomacy.
Yeah.
It tries to avoid cultural import and ready-made exhibitions, ready-made projects, instead trying to do the context around it. And I think this is the most important, to be sensitive to the context. Otherwise, one is like an alien coming to Russia, or Russians coming to Qatar, and how there is no like vocabulary and translation for the cultural products also. It's important.
Adaptation.
Yeah, adaptation.
Absolutely, you're right.
So my next question is about EastEast, a digital platform and EastEast paper, in addition in the format of a newspaper that Cultural Creative Agency established several months ago. So my question is, what happens when East meet East?
Many things. It could be marriage. It could be conflict. It could be partnership.
But first of all, what is East? Is it a geographical term or a cultural term?
It's geography, it's culture, it's people, it's history, it's memories.
But Russia, is it East or West for Qatari?
For Qatar, Russia is East. And I would say that even Russians sometimes struggle defining their compass, I would say, whether they're East or part of the West, and Russia is Russia for what it is. But from a geographical orientation standpoint, we look at Russia as an Eastern country with an Eastern culture. Of course, huge influences from other parts of the world, the West and the Occident had its big influence. And Qatar is part of that East as well. And we are very proud of it. And we see that all these different Easts with different cultures, different representations constitute this beautiful mosaic of the East, and that their East is not one East. I mean, we say Eastern because we are in this dichotomy of having to define another part of the world as the West. We all say that we are from the East, right?
Yeah.
That's the, let's say, the bigger umbrella. But as you go one step below, the denominations start to fragment until you find yourself in a little village or a little geography, and you juxtapose yourself vis-a-vis somebody else in the neighboring village.
Yeah.
And I think that is what I believe the East constitutes. There's a unity and there is diversity within it. Unity as in the fact that we all recognize that we are from the East. Diversity is that this East also has its own substructures, that each is influenced by the local environment and by the context of that place.
Once you mentioned that Edward Said and his books and his theories influenced a lot your vision of the East and understanding of its history and its development in future. I know that we are running out of time, but I would love also you to comment what was the most important, not the theory, but meaning that you gained from these books and his theories.
I think the sense of empowerment, because he said, I mean, Edward's critical point is either you define yourself or you'll be defined by the others.
Yeah.
And for long, most people accepted definitions of others about themselves. And I think what Edward pointed out is this is the root cause of the problem, as we have not created or enabled ourselves to define who we are and what we stand for. And we fell victim to labeling, to characterization, and not only that, but we also internalized it and believed it and acted upon it. And the biggest takeaway from Edward, for me personally, was to break away from that set of definitions and to start our definitions by ourselves, influenced by our value system and the context that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, he shifted the perspective of people.
Yeah.
And also, I think that he is one of the main pillars of this, what we call alternative navigation for now, because the world is so turbulent right now, and people are searching for these alternative navigations to see the world not in the dichotomy, but as constitute out of different worlds, that have their own meaning, their own values, their own traditions. And you know that the main topic of our open call, open call for Cosmoscow, was turbulence, and it was our response to this difficult world and difficult moment we are all in. And you mentioned also that your aim and your mission is to make the world safer place, and you are longing for this safe place for everybody, What does it mean for you, the safe world?
The world, obviously, we as humans, we are fallible human creatures.
Yeah.
We will make mistakes, we will make errors, and that's who we are. That's how we are composed, how we are made. And the question remains as to what system, framework, terms of reference that we can live through that could mitigate to a certain extent our fallibility, our deviation, our inbuilt distortion systems that exist within each and every one of us. And I felt that the 16th century or 15th century sort of change within the Occident, starting with the Renaissance, moving on to the Industrial Revolution, to modern times and postmodernism, have created this environment of havoc and chaos as everyone started to use their own terms of reference to basically try to live in this world, and so the only variable that exists, that is used, is power, and in every sphere of life, and this has accelerated planetary systems to the brim. Today we can certainly, with all the scientific, let's say, collective agreement that the world is suffering from the highest level of CO2 concentration. Last winter we didn't have snow in most of Europe, and this impacts the livelihoods of billions of people, and not only impacts them in ways that we don't feel it, but actually they start to migrate, and they start to put pressure on other countries, and that creates social problems, that fuels the anger of those people who receive them. And then this sets everyone in a cycle of trying to fend for themselves and for whatever interest they have. And then we end up having all these major conflicts and issues. So for me, I went to investigate the root cause of this problem, and I said, surely, we could create some sort of terms of reference that could help us all, or point to a set of terms of reference that we could all come across, that will mitigate the problems that we have created for ourselves. They created this big turbulence in everyone's life, regardless of where they are.
Fahad, what do you think, does art have this force and value to lead people through this despair towards a safer world, to overcome this turbulent time?
Absolutely, the answer in short. If only art is not indifferent to people. If somebody looks at a piece of art and the art does not communicate to that person, how's that art or artist or the person who's engaging with that art is going? What is the takeaway from it? And so I think the role of art is to communicate and to reflect whatever is relevant to that society at that particular time. And I think as we see the situation in our lives getting more and more complicated, I think we need to come back to the sense: should the artist have a degree of responsibility?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you.
And I think if the artist expects somebody to be responsible, I think equally that somebody expects the artist who uses his creative and imaginative mind to influence. If the artist was to gain the respect and trust, I think there are things that the artist can do: challenge my thought, provoke it, inspire me. It doesn't have to always be provocative or challenging, but it can also be inspirational through the beauty of it. Make your work act as a reminder for something that is more valuable than what we perceive to be of value today. Try to, through that work, to guide us somewhere that is more important, not urgent. It is very urgent for us to eat, else we die. But it's very important for us to also have a dimension of the meaning of life. And I think that is what artists can do. Of course, be the victim and the culprit at the same time. Because you say that you are you don't want to be co-opted by this capitalistic system, but
egocentric system.
Egocentric capitalist system, but at the same time, you're part of it, and you're engaged in it, and the commoditization of it has reached levels that this is no longer became art for the people or by the people. It became a commodity that in every discussion that I happen to go to every now and then, the discussion is not about the artistic value, but rather about the collectability, the value of monetary value of this. And this obviously to the society, not to those few who use this art for as commodity and trade, but for the rest, for the community, this becomes irrelevant, and this becomes an act of indulgence and another set of instrumentalization that they find themselves out of and not engaged in. And I think that's where art can play a significant role if we allow and support and facilitate for art to not be subject and influenced by the market forces.
Thank you, Fahad.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.